Hey you guys, Eric26MSDFS here, shooting you another video here for this time NFL Week 1 recap video for the Millionaire Maker Contest. Follow me on Twitter at EricSullivan79, and let's just jump right into this video. So, I went ahead and did 3 entries into the Millionaire Maker as well as into other contests. I originally was going to go ahead and go with the strategy of stacking the Phillip Rivers of the Los Angeles Chargers with Keenan Allen, and potentially then running it back with pass catcher for the Colts in the game between the Colts and the Chargers. But I, against my better judgment, decided I wasn't going to go ahead and use that same stack of Phillip Rivers with Keenan Allen on all 3 of my teams, just in case of, say, Phillip Rivers having to leave the game early and getting knocked out, and then all 3 of my lineups would have been dead money. So what I did instead was then I went with 3 separate stacks and then kind of created 3 separate but similar builds with the players around the quarterback wide receiver stacks. So just wanted to go ahead and then do a recap and explain why I chose some of the guys that I chose, and just to kind of get back into this NFL season. So the first lineup that I went with was ended up with 143.12 points, and that had a total aggregate percentage ownership of 121.2%. This was a Patrick Mahomes to Tyreek Hill stack, and then it came back the other way with Dede Westbrook in the game between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Patrick Mahomes at only 8.1% owned was a good play at 3 passing touchdowns, 378 passing yards, got the 300-yard passing bonus. But unfortunately, Tyreek Hill, I like that he was only 9.2% owned, probably because of the cornerback matchup. But unfortunately, he had to leave the game early and only got 4.1 total Draftkings points. The running backs that I went with on this lineup were Chris Carson, as they were big home favorites. The Seattle Seahawks were against the Cincinnati Bengals, and he had a good game with a receiving touchdown, a rushing touchdown, and 6 catches. Draftkings full point PPR. He did well for his salary. Also went with Nick Chubb. He, like the Cleveland Browns, did not live up to the expectations of what the Week 1 was supposed to have for them, which I suppose makes sense because the public was on them so much so through the off season and going into Week 1, that really the only thing that they could do was have a huge letdown like they did against the Tennessee Titans. Chubb had 3 catches for 10 yards and then added 75 rushing yards. Went with the Tyler Boyd, wide receiver, also in that Cincinnati-Seattle game, with A.J. Green being sidelined for the Bengals. Tyler Boyd was the obvious pick, but unfortunately for me, it was the other wide receiver in Cincinnati, John Ross, who had the big game. For these tournaments, we're looking for the high upside plays, and that's basically what I was going with, mixing and matching some of these value plays with that also did have high upside. It just didn't work out in this one, especially with one of your higher salary plays, one of my higher salary plays, Tyreek Hill, having to leave the game early. D.D. Westbrook was a fairly chalky value wide receiver at 26.8%, and he paid off his salary but didn't win you the week. And with so many people being on him, didn't really move the needle for you that you need in these GPPs to have these high finishes. But he did have 5 catches for 30 yards, a touchdown, and then he also had 2 rushing yards. My tight end position, I went with Zach Ertz at only 9.4% owned. He finished with 5 catches for 54 yards, and being the third most expensive tight end, that didn't pay off either. And surprisingly, in a game that they were supposed to win heftily, they got down early to the Redskins, to Washington, and he just never got in the end zone. And it is somewhat risky going with Philadelphia tight end, given that they also have a very good pass catching backup tight end in Dallas Goedert. So it didn't quite work out for me this time, but at only 9.4% ownership, if he got into the end zone once or twice, then it would have been a good play. In the flex spot, went with Curtis Samuel, wide receiver, value wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers. He only finished with 3 catches for 32 yards. And lastly, the bright spot for this lineup was the 49ers defense, which looked great with the new pass rush, a couple of defensive touchdowns, pick sixes. They're looking good. Nick Bosa was able to play. They had to go play down in Tampa with the heat and humidity, and forced Jameis Winston to make some mistakes and turn them into points. They finished with 3 sacks, 3 picks, 1 fumble recovery, 2 touchdowns. So that was the bright spot for my third best lineup. My second best lineup, which cashed in some tournaments but not in the Millionaire Maker, went with the stack of Matt Ryan to Julio Jones at only a 2.3% ownership for Matt Ryan. He got 2 touchdowns. He got the 300-yard passing bonus, finished with 304. He also chipped in 24 rushing yards. He did have 2 interceptions, though. Julio Jones, at only 9.3% owned, was able to get into the end zone in week 1. 6 catches for 31 yards and a touchdown, but not the high ceiling gain that you hope for out of your where you spend up on, where you're allocating a lot of your salary to. This lineup also went with Chris Carson, who had a good game, as I mentioned earlier, and then I went with Leonard Fournette for the Jacksonville Jaguars running back. The offense was supposed to be ran through him, even though that they were going to be trailing in this game and not necessarily the best situation for running backs. He's the type that's a bell cow that gets a lot of touches, and that's all you want is opportunities. He finished with 66 rushing yards and 4 catches for 28 receiving yards and then 1 fumble. In the second wide receiver spot, I went with Adam Thielen, which was ran back on the Minnesota side in that Atlanta and Minnesota game at 28.4% owned. He was a play that everybody was on after the injury news and mispractice from Stephon Diggs came out, and he finished with 3 catches for 43 yards and 1 receiving touchdown. Also went with D.D. Westbrook in this lineup. And then tight end in this lineup, I differentiated by going with Hunter Henry from the Los Angeles Chargers. And I think word just came out that unfortunately he suffered an injury in week 1. So curious to see what the Chargers are going to do now at the tight end position. I don't know if they still have Virgil Green. Um, Antonio Gates, perhaps, again, get him going again, or look to any number of other guys. Have to look at their depth chart. 4 catches for 60 yards. He didn't have the huge game that everybody was hoping for, and kind of missed on that tight end range. Uh, right in between Zach Ertz and Hunter Henry was Evan Ingram for the New York Giants, who had a huge game as the offense has been run through him and Saquon Barkley, um, especially if Eli Manning is still starting. Good thing about this lineup is that I did have Austin Eckler, who had a huge game for the Chargers. 3 total touchdowns, 2 receiving, 1 rushing, 96 receiving yards, 58 rushing yards, and 6 catches, which really helped. And only had 12.5% ownership, guys. So I mean, guys and gals, 1 out of 8 lineups used him. I mean, that's pretty good, considering that the top 20 or so percent cash. That would be a plus play that gets you up in the money. And lastly, the Seahawks defense, who were supposed to have a huge game, but they had 5 sacks and 3 defensive fumble recoveries, so that was really good. But not a big, huge game out of them point total that you are hoping to get. That lineup had a total of 100, and as my highest chalky lineup, with the wide receivers being so chalky and also having Chris Carson at 162.1% aggregate ownership. So a little high on the ownership on that one to really differentiate enough to vault up the leaderboards, because you're going to have a lot of guys who have the same similar type of lineups. And last but certainly not least, I did stick with one Phillip Rivers to Keenan Allen, unfortunate stack, but unfortunately I did not run it back with T.Y. Hilton, who also had a really good game. There's also opportunity potential to have Austin Eckler in a lineup if you're going with Phillip Rivers, Keenan Allen stack, because of the amount of receptions that Austin Eckler gets out of the backfield and his explosive playability. But nonetheless, this is why we do these recaps, because we're trying to figure out where we can go ahead and then improve upon for the next week's build. So this lineup went with Phillip Rivers at only 3.7%. He finished with 3 passing touchdowns, 333 yards, 6 rushing yards, 1 interception, and then got the 300-yard bonus. This lineup had Dalvin Cook, at 37% owned running back. We knew he was going to be highly owned, but he paid off. He finished with 111 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, and then so he got the bonus, 100-yard bonus, and then he got 2 catches for 9 yards chipped in also. So a really good game out of him. A little over 1/3 of the field had him moving up the board. At the RB2, I had Mark Ingram from the Baltimore Ravens, who had a good matchup against the Miami Dolphins. He had a good game, 107 rushing yards, gets the bonus, and 2 rushing touchdowns for Mark Ingram. Unfortunately, did not have Lamar Jackson or Marquise Brown, who were the plays that won it for won the $1 million for Lucky Someone. And I'm eager to see how Baltimore's going to do, and then also if Miami is going to be able to bounce back next week against the New England Patriots. This lineup also, moving on down, had Tyler Boyd. Mentioned him earlier. He had 8 catches for 60 yards, and D.D. Westbrook, and also Zach Ertz, and also Chris Carson, and also the Seahawks defense. Lineup finished with 187.92 points, and it had an aggregate total ownership of 150.9%. So that will pretty much do it for the week 1 recap Millie Maker video, and just kind of wanted to give you a little bit of a glimpse how things shook out, what we could have improved upon, what we're thinking for next week. I think that overall my total ownership was slightly higher than I wanted, but still in the range that I was hoping for, and pretty risk averse, so I have to look into differentiating in some places, especially in these types of contests where you're looking to win. You don't want to just min cash. If you're looking at just minimal cash, you should be playing in cash games and play the chalk. But since we're trying to win these huge field tournaments of 294,000 entries where 67,000 people are getting paid out, that's only like about 20%. And the payouts go up by a lot the higher you finish. So the better you do and the more differentiation that you have with the higher scores, then obviously that's the strategy and that's the way to win these things. But anyways, please, you guys, we're going to be doing some more videos. Golf is back, NFL is back. Going to be trying to get some more content out to you guys, so please like, share, subscribe, comment down below what you think of the lineups, comment down below with who you think is going to be one of the lower owned players that's going to have a good game for NFL Week 2, and we will see you in the next video. Thank you so much.